So, climate change is our first issue for this week on Hala London Radio. And what are we going to talk about? What are we going to say regarding climate change? You remember the famous Greta Thunberg, the school child who's been causing such a stir amongst the older generation as she goes around saying, "How dare you," with regard to the way we squander our world's resources. "How dare you," says Greta, the youngster that's all calling us all to account. And here in Britain, we've had the movement Extinction Rebellion fighting against climate change, fighting for a better policy on behalf of the government with regard to zero emissions. And what's the government's response? I'm just talking about Britain now, we've had a pathetically weak Queen's speech, one of the worst possible on that issue. Climate change is just mentioned in passing in the centre of the thing, rather than being a prime issue. That's trouble with Britain. We've got a government obsessed with Brexit, and we'll talk more about that issue later. But and meanwhile, the British Metropolitan Police, the voice of the establishment, and the police commissioner have banned protest by Extinction Rebellion in the capital. A pathetic, weak-willed, lily-livered gesture by an incompetent establishment that are not coming to grips with the issue. And what is the issue? Well, we can talk about alternative energy, and let's start with nuclear power, because this is a beloved solution trumped up by various people. It's hugely expensive, massively expensive. Nuclear power is cost-heavy. Cost-heavy because you have to reprocess the fuel and the waste of the blooming reactors. I mean, it is a vast problem. Much of Britain's Lake District has nuclear waste buried underneath it. Sellafield, the great nuclear reprocessing plant of the world. Well, Britain cannot absorb the waste of the entire nuclear waste of the entire world, although it's been doing its best. There may be fast bucks involved in reprocessing nuclear waste, but it is not an answer. It's not an answer whether you bury it in China, or you bury it in the Sahara Desert, or you bury it in Britain's Lake District. No, we need this. This is an expensive business. And it's also hugely dangerous. We've seen accidents, Chernobyl, which have caused vast problems with nuclear power stations. We have seen the influence of, and that was an accident by human error, we've seen the influence of climate on nuclear power stations. Now, Chernobyl has meant that a whole swathe of territory is uninhabited for generations, uninhabitable. Weather, climate, we've seen in Japan. There's a whole swathe of northern Japan that's uninhabitable for generations because a nuclear power station was damaged by extreme weather, by storm. And what we haven't seen, but we will see, give it time, is a nuclear power station damaged by war. I mean, imagine if there had been a nuclear power station that had been vulnerable to drone strike in Saudi Arabia, and some Houthi missile hit it. Boy, you'd have a whole swathe of Saudi Arabia that was uninhabitable for a generation. No, and it's the foolishness of building these things anywhere. They are dangerous for the ordinary people of the world, and they should not be built. They should not be built. They should never be built. It's not the answer. Now, we do need an answer. 20 fossil fuel producers have produced 35% of the world's carbon dioxide, CO2, since 1965. Just 20 of them. So we need an alternative. And the alternatives are wind, water, and sun. And we need to develop these alternative sources of energy fast. The Middle East has it got 20 years to go as a major oil supplier for the world? I don't think so. Not the way things are going. At least 10 years. Yes, it's got 10 years. Has it Perhaps it's got 15 years, but 20, no. It'll take time, but we are moving away from oil dependence, from dependence on oil and gas. And the developed world will move faster. And when I say the developed world, I'm talking particularly of Europe. The United States of America is behind Europe on this issue, but Europe, I would say, by 2035, for instance, will no longer use oil, will no longer use petrol. And in my view, within the lifetime of the younger people in this world, well within their lifetime, for goodness sake, by 2045, the developed world, and particularly Europe, will no longer use natural gas. This is a trend that is irreversible. Irreversible. So the Middle East should plan for that eventuality and be aware, as far as the Gulf states and the major oil-producing states, that their gravy train will end. And it's already, the world's moving in that direction fast. So what do? Well, I think, if you talk about GCC states that are majorly dependent on oil and are cash rich at the moment, they should try and develop technological centers of excellence, in my view, because one thing I know, having lived in the Middle East, is the Arabs are better at maths and sciences by a mile than people in the West. Arab children are years ahead of their counterparts in the West when it comes to maths. They may not be in some other subjects, and there are real problems with rote learning in the Middle East and some of the approaches to that. But what is most certain is that the Middle East is well advanced compared to the West with regard to maths. I've had school children. I know the situation. They studied in the Middle East. They came back to Britain, and they were years ahead of their counterparts here in the UK. And because the levels of maths education are so low, the expectation is so low of children who have sharp little brains and can deal with that. I'm just saying, technological centers of excellence in the Arab world are for science and maths and for the high-tech industries that depend on them. I'm talking about computer sciences and so on. Wow, the Middle East could do so well in taking a lead on this. And the non-oil producing states like Syria, Lebanon, and the others, well, how about a little emphasis on alternative energy? I am struck, by having traveled all over the Middle East, by the way, for instance, in Israel, all water is solar heated. And often it's an easy peasy lemon squeezy solution. They have, you'll see, for a start, in Israel, water tanks are always on the roof. So in summer, you won't be heating your water with electricity. That thing is boiling hot just from the sun. But you see that you do see that in Jordan to an extent. But throughout the Middle East, no. Many homes have ridiculously heat their water with electricity in the Middle East. Come on. Wake up. Look at Israel. Okay, in midwinter you might need a reserve immersion heater, but throughout the summer months and well into September, no, there is no need for there's no need for anything but solar power to heat your water. Anyway, I'm just saying this. I'm rambling on, but the point is that there are ways in which the Middle East is ahead of the West. By the way, this we could do a bit by looking and listening to each other. I lived in the Sultanate of Oman for years. The Sultanate of Oman, down the bottom of the Arabian Gulf. Lived there for 6 years. Now, one of the ways in which they are environmentally streets ahead of Britain and Europe is the way they sell their electricity. So the way it works is that you pay so much a unit in the Middle East, in the Sultanate of Oman, for your power, like you do in the West, like you do in Britain, like you do in America. But then what happens? So you use your first 1,000 units at that price. Your second 1,000 units are double the price. Okay, got it? Double. The price doubles for your second 1,000 units. Okay, that's pretty much a kick in the teeth. Your third 1,000 units and above, the price doubles, quadruples what it was for your first 1,000 units. Now, and this is the policy in the Sultanate of Oman with regard to the sale of electricity. What does this mean in environmental terms? It means that if you're an ordinary Omani with a little house to heat, or in rather what it is really is not the cost of heating, it's the cost of air conditioning in the summer. So let's a little house, small scale, normal Omani with a little house to air condition, it costs you almost nothing. But if you're a rich Omani with a big palace to air condition that takes thousands of units of electricity, it costs you an arm and a leg. And this is a very useful way of people being made aware of the value and the need to not squander electricity. I mean, why don't we do something like that in the West? We don't, because we're streets behind the Sultanate of Oman. And in other ways too, but I'll talk about that in another occasion. Now, you're going to say it's all very well. The West may do this, but what about places like China and India? They can ignore all this and go on burning fossil fuels. No, they cannot. No, they cannot. Quite apart from the international political pressure, over time, there will be a climate tax levy on international goods. It's inevitable, so that we have a level playing field, so that countries that are squandering the world's resources get a tax on their trade of goods. And I think that'll come sooner than people imagine. So watch out, China and India, if you go on being major polluters. I know Britain had the luxury of being a major polluter in the Industrial Revolution. I'm sorry you don't have that privilege. The world has to change. Britain and America, of course, will have to take a lead. America is pathetic in the way it's not behind the cue ball on this one, but we will have to take a lead. Now, what about personally? Can you do something? Yes, you can. Vegetarianism helps. Oh, yes, it does. You may not like to hear that. But meat eating makes for methane because cows and so on are ruminants and they belch. It's a problem. It's a real problem. And so we have to reduce our dependence on meat from ruminants like cattle, and to a lesser extent, but also significantly, sheep. But cattle in particular. So beef is very expensive to the environment. And yes, vegetarianism would help. You could make that gesture on behalf of the climate of the world. It would make a difference if more people turned away from eating their beef burgers from McDonald's. I'm sorry, but let's be blunt. It is expensive to the world. But there's something else you can do. You know, I got a sweet niece called Isabel. She's a lovely lady, and she's an environmentalist. She works for the RSPB. And what did she do the other day to get home from Cornwall to Essex, from Cornwall in the west of England to Essex in the east of England? She jumped on a short-haul flight. Do you do that? Do you jump on short-haul flights and claim to be an environmentalist? Now, I'm not arguing against flying. Of course, we need flights to take us to the Middle East or even to Europe. Well, perhaps not from London to Paris, but, further afield to Rome and Greece and so on, and to the south of Spain. Yes, we need flights. We need flights to take us across to the United States of America. We need flights to take us to Australia. But you realize that the big burn in terms of fossil fuel, in terms of aeroplanes, is on takeoff and landing. And there is no excuse at all for anybody who pretends to be an environmentalist to take a little short-haul flight when rail travel is available, or bus travel is available as an alternative. I mean, you're looking... look at it. People take flights from Cornwall to London. People take flights from London to Paris. People take flights from London to Scotland. I mean, there are good, fast rail links for these places, let alone bus. There is no excuse. What, are you saving yourself an hour or two? I'm sorry. And you pretend to be an environmentalist? I'm sorry. You are a vegetarian? Well, stuff it. It makes not a squodge or not a squidgen of difference compared to the way you're burning up fossil fuel by taking a short-haul flight. You don't need to do it. You can take the train, take the bus, go another way. But short-haul flights are hugely environmentally damaging because they're not necessary. Simply that, because they are not necessary. We need flying, of course we need flying, but not for little idgily-pidgily little journeys. No, that is climate change negative, so change your behavior. Okay, there's enough preaching from me. I'm not perfect myself, but I tell you one thing, I shan't be taking a short-haul flight from London to Cornwall, not as long as I live. So let's try and do what we can for the environment. Let's try and make a difference. We must, and the world needs this from us. Okay, God bless you. More to talk about. Okay, bye.